Today, we're going to dig into the hidden story behind a product that was once hailed as a miracle of modern chemistry. It promised this whole new world of convenience, but it came with a secret that unleashed a whole family of virtually indestructible poisons that are now found inside every single one of us. This is the story of forever chemicals.
I know, it sounds like a totally crazy question, right? But back in the 1920s and 30s, this was a very real danger. See, the first refrigerators used gases that were either super toxic, like methyl chloride, which could literally kill you in your sleep, or they were highly flammable. A tiny leak could turn your kitchen into an inferno. So yeah, people were desperately searching for something safer.
And that desperate need for a safer chemical is exactly what sent the scientists at a company called DuPont on a quest. They were looking for a solution, but what they stumbled upon was something nobody could have possibly predicted, a substance that seemed to completely defy the laws of chemistry.
Which brings us to the first chapter in our story, an accidental miracle.
Okay, so there's this young DuPont chemist. His name's Roy Plunkett, and he's working with this gas, tetrafluoroethylene. Let's just call it TFE. So one morning, he grabs a cylinder of it, opens the valve, and nothing comes out. He figures it's empty, so he saws the whole thing open, and inside, it's packed with this bizarre, slippery white powder. The gas molecules had just spontaneously linked together into these long chains. It's a process called polymerization.
Now, the reason this powder was so indestructible all comes down to its unique chemistry, the carbon-fluorine bond. It's just about the strongest single bond a carbon atom can make, and this new material was covered in them, making it incredibly inert. DuPont immediately saw the potential and trademarked it with a name that was way catchier, Teflon.
But there was a huge problem. Discovering this miracle material was one thing, but producing it on an industrial scale, that was a whole other beast. And that challenge leads us right to our next section, the secret helper chemical.
You see, that polymerization process that creates Teflon, it generates a massive amount of heat. And if you can't get that heat under control, it can lead to a violent explosion. And that's exactly what happened at a DuPont plant back in 1944. It killed 2 workers. They desperately needed a way to disperse all that heat, and the best way to do that was to run the reaction in water. But there was a catch. The main ingredient for Teflon, well, it doesn't mix with water. Think oil and water.
So to solve this problem, DuPont needed a chemical that could act kind of like soap, something that would allow their main ingredient to disperse in the water. In 1951, they started buying this substance from 3M called PFOA, or C8 for short. And this chemical was the magic key. It allowed them to manufacture Teflon safely and on a massive scale. But here's the thing, unlike the final Teflon product, which is super stable and inert, this helper chemical was, well, it was anything but.
For decades, Teflon was a massive success story. But the truth about that helper chemical, it stayed completely hidden. And then it started to bubble to the surface, in the most unlikely of places, all thanks to a farmer's fight.
So down in West Virginia, there's this cattle farmer, Earl Tennant, and he starts noticing his cows are just wasting away. They're developing these black teeth and these grotesque tumors right after drinking from a creek where he'd seen this weird white foam bubbling out of a discharge pipe. And that pipe? It led directly back to a landfill owned by DuPont's massive Washington Works Teflon plant.
So Tennant hires a lawyer, a guy named Rob Billot, who basically forced DuPont to turn over its internal documents. And what he found was just staggering, a decades-long deception. DuPont knew. They knew C8 was toxic all the way back in 1961. By the 70s, they were finding it in the blood of their own workers. And then, in 1984, they found it contaminating public drinking water, and they kept it a secret. They knew, for decades.
This discovery absolutely blew the story wide open. Suddenly, it wasn't just about one farmer's cows or one town's water. No, this was the first real glimpse of a global issue, which brings us to our next section, the forever chemical problem.
You see, that helper chemical, PFOA, it's part of this massive family of man-made chemicals called PFAS. We're talking over 14,000 different kinds, but they all share that one same atomic feature, that incredibly strong carbon-fluorine bond. The very property that makes them so useful, their indestructibility, is the exact same thing that makes them a permanent poison. They just don't break down in nature, which is why they've earned that chilling nickname, forever chemicals.
And because they are so good at repelling water and grease, they're everywhere.
We're talking fast food wrappers, waterproof jackets, non-stick pans, stain-resistant carpets, cosmetics, even the firefighting foam used at airports and on military bases. They've basically become a hidden ingredient in modern life.
And since these chemicals never ever go away, they just build up. They're now found in rainwater on the Tibetan Plateau, in the bodies of polar bears in the Arctic, and yep, in the blood of nearly every single human on the planet. This isn't just a local issue anymore. It's a global contamination.
So the scale of the problem is just enormous. But after decades of secrecy, the world is finally starting to wake up. Which brings us to the most crucial question of all. What can we do? Let's start with a number. Back in 1984, after finding C8 in drinking water, DuPont's own scientists came up with what they considered a safe exposure limit. And that number was 1 part per billion. Now, at the time, that was basically the lowest level they could even detect with their technology. Okay, now, let's fast forward 40 years. In April of 2024, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, set the first ever legal enforceable limit for PFOA in drinking water. Their number? 4 parts per trillion. That is 250 times stricter than DuPont's own internal guideline.
I mean, 1 trillion is just a mind-bogglingly huge number. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. So to put 4 parts per trillion in perspective, imagine a single drop of this chemical mixed into 5,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The science is now telling us that these chemicals are dangerous at levels that are almost undetectable.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, first, it's that forever chemicals are a massive, hidden part of our modern world. Second, after decades and decades of corporate secrecy, regulations are finally starting to catch up to the science. And third, just like we're seeing now, when consumers, like you and me, become aware of a problem, we can actually pressure companies to find safer alternatives. Look, this isn't the first time we've faced a miracle product that turned out to be a poison. We did it with lead in gasoline. We did it with asbestos. We did it with CFCs. And each time, it took a massive, concentrated effort. So the question now is, with the secret finally out in the open, what will it take for us to do it again?